Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be here at this SphinxConnect. For me, it's one of the first times I get to see all your lovely faces in one place, and to meet this wonderful panel of ladies as well. And a lot of this is by design. We have two violists and a former string player, yes. And we're going to talk about chamber music. We're going to talk about the history a little bit, and also where the trajectory of chamber music thus far and where it's going, and how we can help the evolution of the place of smaller ensembles in our musical society today. I wanted to just start by the introductions, and then I'll get a little bit into what I perceive as the history of chamber music. And we'll have some time for questions, and if you have, if you're able to come to the mic, that would be great. Otherwise, you can put it in the hop-in online, and it'll pop up, and I can ask the question on your behalf. So we're going to start with Celia Hatton on my far left, and she's a violist based in New York, a member and co-artistic director of A Far Cry, and also in the Chamber Orchestra of New York. And I'm just going to say music and chamber music was a huge part of your education. We're going to dive into that a little bit because I think it's also important to remember everybody's journey to where we are today, and that's also a little bit of what we're going to discuss. On her right is Leslie DeShazor, another violist, but who dibble-dabbles in a little more than classical, and you're currently on tour with Hamilton, and has her own jazz ensembles, and is a longtime educator. And we also have Ana de Archuleta, who has founded your own music agency. Correct. But since December, you have been the program director at National Sawdust in Brooklyn.
Managing director?
Managing director. Titles are important. Managing programming and probably wearing a lot of hats.
Oh, right now, yes.
Yes, yes, but your hair looks great. Okay. So the goal of this, like I said, is to discuss chamber music, to discuss the smaller ensemble approach, especially since we're in a conference that is celebrating a lot of large ensembles, and the role that chamber music has had in education at the conservatory level, at the School of Music level, has been healthy in some places and I think sidelined in some other places. And I wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about how individual composers are helping change the fabric, about how the audience, how programming directors and managing directors and musicians are helping change the perception and the acceptance of chamber music in our role today. So I wanted to get started and just go down the line a little bit, and we can start with Celia, about just your background in chamber music and how you got started and what your first experience was like and how that helped feed your career today.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I got into chamber music pretty young, but I'd first actually like to start in first grade. My mom came home from a parent-teacher conference, and I overheard her talking to my dad about how it went. And she said, well, the teacher said that Seal is really quiet in class. And at that age, I didn't really know what it meant, but I could tell it wasn't a compliment. And my mom continued, you know, I guess she's quiet in class, but I told the teacher, you know, when she's at home, she's always dancing and singing and jumping and running, and she's quite loud. And so I've always had this introverted side to me. And at age 12, I went to my first summer music festival. It was the Philadelphia International Music Festival. It was like 2 weeks. We got to study with members of the Philadelphia Orchestra and try out chamber music. And so I was assigned to a string quartet. I think we did Haydn or Mozart. And our coach was trying to get us to make greater contrast in the dynamics. And our homework assignment for rehearsal was we were supposed to sing our parts together. And so once we were left to our own devices, first the first violinist just burst into song, and then the second violinist, and just all, it was an explosion of youth and excitement. You know, like when you're a kid and you're in the pool in the deep end, you swim to the bottom, you're holding your breath, and you try to come, and you're running out of breath, and you finally make it to the top, and that first gasp of air, I was like, oh my gosh, chamber music. This is it. I want to do this forever. And so it has always been an outlet for me. So once my parents knew, I was madly, madly in love and felt seen and alive through chamber music. I got to go to quartet concerts as a teenager at that point. I remember seeing the Pacifica Quartet, Biava Quartet with Paul Katz. They did Schubert Cello Quintet, and you know, the slow movement, the pizzicato. It was like Paul Katz was a sorcerer, and he was just gathering wind, and the hurricane was inside. There was just so much music before he even played. And it's just so magical to teenage Celia. And so by the time it was time for conservatory, I wanted to be in a quartet, full stop. And NEC, I'd heard, was known for chamber music. And so that's why I went. I was in a quartet. We were only allowed to be in one quartet group at a time. And so, you know, threw myself into it, and it wasn't as simple, I guess, as I not that I thought it was simple, but, you know, you learn about interpersonal dynamics, and maybe there was some friction, and it was really my first experience dealing with that and not really knowing how to deal with it. So the second semester, one of the members had asked one of the other members to be in a quartet, and meaning they didn't ask me. And so I was crushed. This is my freshman year in my dream school, and that's just one of the growing pains of being in chamber music. It's a place where you can be yourself, and so when there is rejection, it stings. But that's something that all of us have had to grow through.
There's a lot to unpack there. There is the element, and first of all, I'm sorry, I didn't even introduce myself for those who know me, but I'm Mariam, clarinetist, and some of you might know me from my Imani Wednesdays, because there was about 20 years worth there, and I'm now at the Blair School of Music, still based between Paris but mostly Nashville, and still doing a lot of chamber music, Chineke ensemble, my own transatlantic ensemble, and whoever else lets me come in and play clarinet. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that your first experience, which was very positive, was string quartet. And this, I think, warrants a little bit of the history of why string quartet became such a standard in the chamber music world. It's fair to say that Haydn is the headliner for having fathered the string quartet, and the purpose was always to be in the chambers of the aristocrats, in their parlor, while they're eating dinner, and the music had to be uplifting, it had to be entertaining, and as time went along, for sure, Beethoven allowed a deeper depth and allowed a new expansion into string quartets. But at the time, it was also a matter of the technology of the instruments. Some things were not meant to play loud in larger halls, and as things developed, I think different composers allowed the less popular approach to the string quartet. So from Debussy to Schoenberg, you had this evolution of the standard string quartet because everybody was able to play either the cello or the violin. Not many people playing wind instruments for a variety of other reasons. We don't need to get into that, but later on we made up for it. But as time went along, I think I found it interesting that the string quartet also reflected music that was more nationalist in some ways to celebrate what a particular composer was celebrating, but also more introverted. And that allowed musicians to explore different parts of their own musicality and musicianship more and more. I think it's a boon for the string quartet that there are thousands of string quartets. And you could play a different one every day for 35 years. So, whereas the wind quintet can do that for a year now. But this has absolutely fed one of the reasons why. It's just, it's volume of the repertoire and the ability to expand on it. And that means also that musicians would favor that. And as a student in a conservatory, I want to know, did you have an option to play when it wasn't a string quartet, because you only had one choice for one ensemble per semester, which I don't agree with, because it's a smaller ensemble, you should be able to get together and do more, and these things are changing. Did you have a chance to play in a string quintet or in a mixed ensemble?
Yes, I was in a trio, viola, cello, piano. I was in a piano quintet, piano quartet, but never with winds. I did.
Well, there's a great segue, because Leslie did. And Leslie, why don't you tell us about your first chamber music experience?
First, I'll say that I played the Brook with clarinet, viola, and piano.
Okay.
Yeah, I also did the harp trio, Debussy,
15,
flute,
0.
viola, harp. So my introductions to chamber music happened much later. I actually started on viola, which didn't happen back then. I was the only one for so long. That was like my claim to fame. I started on the viola. But my very first introduction to chamber music was actually Haydn Quartet as well. I think I was in 8th grade. And I was just excited to play some notes. Because up to then, I was on these Merle J. Isaac arrangements, which gave the violas whole notes tied to whole notes tied to whole notes tied to whole notes. I was so bored. I used to learn the violin part by ear in orchestra and do really obnoxious things. Thank God karma has not come back to get me on that. So my first time playing in a quartet was Haydn. But then after that, when I was in high school, the more advanced players, we were in a chamber orchestra which gigged and we got paid. So, of course, that made me very excited about chamber music. But I always loved it, I think, particularly as a violist, because it was the one time that I felt like I could really be heard. In orchestra, those of you who are familiar with just like the school orchestra situation, back then it's probably a little different than it is now. The viola parts were always the most poorly arranged of, or maybe bass could take that argument too. I don't know. But the viola part was usually very bare bones, very simple, very boring. I think a lot of times violas start later, so we don't have the same technical chops as the cellists and violinists, and of course arrangers have to keep that in mind. But I went on to do music as a major at the University of Michigan. And I think similarly, we could only choose one ensemble per semester, and that probably has to do with like credits and classes and I don't know. Anyway, I really had mostly great experience, but that was the first time that I learned that just because you have a group of really great players, it doesn't mean you're gonna have a really great sound. I was put in a grad quartet, and I was a freshman, and everyone was like, you're probably in the best quartet because this person and this person and this person. But the chemistry was wrong. It was just, hopefully nobody from that quartet is in the audience. They might be watching online. Talk to me later. Anyway, but we just didn't have good chemistry. We had very, very interesting personalities in the group. And the cellist and the second violinist would constantly get into these back and forth things where it's like, I think you're dragging, you're rushing. I think you're flat, you're sharp. And so then the first violin to me, it's like one of the only times in life where I was neutral. I had nothing to say because it wasn't going to go anywhere. So I did that quartet for a year, and it was a good learning experience. It taught me something about the importance of chemistry when making music. Obviously, at this point, as professionals, we always give it our all, but when you get a group of people who really love the music and also really like each other, there's just so much magic that can happen between those people. So for me, chamber music has always been gratifying in that you have so much say-so. You can participate so much. You're not being told what to play always by a conductor. You can actually make artistic decisions with the group. The diplomacy aspect of it, of course, is another thing. So, yeah.
That's exactly right. And I would be remiss if I didn't give my own 2 cents on this subject about chemistry, because for a clarinetist, for a wind quintet to stay in existence till this day, going strong, Imani Winds, it really took a lot of chemistry, and it took us learning about chemistry. It took us learning about diplomacy, and we had many sessions where we just had to put the instruments down and talk it out. And that went to programming, that went to personal time sacrifices. This was before everyone had families, so we were still dealing with our priority list. And what I will fast forward to is that when you are able to work that out in a small ensemble versus a large orchestra that has a hierarchy of power structure, there are things that one discovers. It's empowering, and if you're in a supportive environment where you are allowed to flourish and to explore parts of your personality, your skill set, and your musicianship, it can really blossom. Now, you need a hand-in-glove situation also with either a good manager and or a presenter who believes in you. And this is a very important aspect of what I want to talk about today, because I think Leslie, Celia, Anna, we're working in this hand-in-glove situation. There are the musicians who want to put the music on stage, who want to bring something to the audience that they may not know about. How many times did I finish a concert in a major series with Imani or even with my trio, and I would get ticket subscribers who would come to the concert and say, oh, my wife dragged me here, or my friend really wanted to drag me here, and I just was not, but I really enjoyed it. Wow, that music you played was an incredible selection, and that piece and it was wonderful. And it was, thank God, they had the faith in their presenter, in the programming director, in the person who is hiring these small ensembles. So I wanted to ask you, Anna, in your experience, I know it's been a short, brief stint already at National Sawdust, but you have a wealth of experience already, and I love how you described in our previous talks the fact that you feel that National Sawdust is almost another instrument and a participant in the chamber ensembles, and you guys are at the forefront of allowing a whole new vocabulary of small ensemble to come to fruition.
Thank you very much. I do have to say that chamber music, let me go back to when I was a child. It's a huge part of the reason I do what I do now. When I was in 6th grade, the Figueroa Quartet in Puerto Rico came to my elementary school, and they presented in the school and talk about the violin and the viola and cello. My sister plays viola. So that was the reason I went into performing arts, because of that experience. So I'm just you talking about it just brought me back to that place, and a major reason why I started in the music and in the arts. But fast forward to National Sawdust. I've been in National Sawdust since September of 2021 as artistic administrator, just promoted to managing director, and I've gotten the opportunity to work with some of the best musicians in that venue. And that venue is intimate. It was made for a small ensemble. It is an instrument. We have the Constellation system, special sound. It's a playground for composers to write for chamber music and for small ensembles. And it's a huge passion of Paula and me and mine to continue to open the doors to all kinds of ensembles and let them pick and let them have the power and agency to create programs that they've never presented before. That's our goal. That's what we want to do. We want to be the first place to present a specific program. We also have the NS Ensemble, who is the music director is Jeff Ziegler, who is a phenomenal cellist and who's very experienced in chamber music, of course. So we're very lucky to have him. And he and I work very, very close together to select and sort of program the series. So it is, for National Sawdust, it's extremely important to support artists and to give them the power to program and to experiment and to incubate new works. So small ensembles is what we do.
And this is really important because you touched on the support, and therefore it's going to segue to money, and how important it is to support smaller ensembles because it often is the platform for composers to find their voice and to start writing, hopefully for larger ensembles, to get to a larger audience. I know Valerie Coleman in Imani Winds started by writing for us very early on, and she was already writing as a teenager. And Jeff Scott and even Toyin dibble-dabbled in writing and arranging. This is why we're able to program their works now. This is why there is a few women of color, and a vastly growing number, thank God, at this point in 2023, because they were given that support by grants. And I want to talk to Celia and a little bit, if you, in a Far Cry, in your chamber orchestra, if you are aware of the grant process, and I think you probably are privy to conversations of when one is writing for a grant, there are sometimes obstacles that are unknown. Sometimes we serve on board and panels and judge applications that come our way. Sometimes there's a disconnect about what people think a smaller ensemble should be doing versus what an ensemble wants to do. And Celia, in your experience, did you find that there were some projects that didn't come to fruition because of funding, lack of funding? Was there a disagreement? I mean, was there a moment that you felt that a project deflated because someone didn't believe in it and therefore didn't get the funding?
Full disclosure, I am new to the organization, so that particular subject hasn't occurred while I've been there. But when programming, there is, I think our executive director might be in the audience. There she is. Hi, Grace. There's a budget for the season, and you have different programs. There's a price for the rental parts of each piece, and it's just the nuts and bolts of putting on any program. Do you want to collaborate with an outside artist? How much is that going to cost? So there was a program recently that many of us were excited to put on, but we just couldn't support it financially. Yeah.
I will say that there was a nice chunk of years that I was able to serve on the board of Chamber Music America, and in that time I saw a lot of applications come through. I saw a lot of growth in the organization as well. I will credit them to be one of the first in the mid-2000s to start talking about diversity and start talking about inclusivity and inclusion, and it was what helped herald in jazz as a viable, smaller ensemble entity, and therefore they were able to apply for funding. And I think Chamber Music America has given a lot of grants to crossover traditional ensembles and remains a very vital part of the funding, and of course all the other grant organizations. So I hope that you guys get a chance to keep applying, because money at this point should not be a hindrance. There's plenty of it floating around. Yeah, please.
So I was thinking as you're talking and as you were talking about this, the evolution that we talk about of music, chamber music, specifically, now that we live in a time where you don't have to wait on someone to fund you, which is really interesting, right? Because you can put together a group of people in your living room and do a concert online, or you can crowdsource or have people actually donate to whatever thing that you want to do. And of course, the internet is a very saturated place. It's not always easy to get engagement or involvement through the internet, but I think about like when I was younger, there was never that option. I mean, you could do a concert in your house, and there have always been those options like house concerts, neighborhood, or organization series. But now I think about like during the pandemic, a lot of people just took a camera and an interface and a computer and created their own opportunities, which when we talk about evolution, like we definitely have to bring that into the conversation, because people don't really have to wait to be funded anymore if they really are super ambitious.
To get there, yeah, absolutely. And it made a lot of tech-savvy people very quickly. I'm not one of them, but yes, Anna.
But what I'm seeing is, as a programmer and as a presenter, is there's very crafty ways that artists are pitching their work. We welcome conversations with artists all the time at different levels. We present from college students to professionals, and it is fascinating the themes, the impact they want to have with their concerts, and why they program the pieces that they program. Like just programming for the sake of, oh, I like Brahms, Mozart, Haydn. It's more like, what do I want to say with this program? What's the impact that I'm going to have socially? There's a lot of activism that I'm seeing in chamber groups that want to create a whole program around climate change, or they want to create a program around social justice and racial justice. And those are the kind of things that we want to open the doors, because it's creativity, and also it's initiative. And we want to applaud that. That initiative, the artists have, that entrepreneurship that I think is so important for artists to have. We see that every day with people that come to National Sawdust. And it's great. We want to invest in that. And we're also talking about Chamber Music America. The future of small organizations that support chamber music is collaborations. Mm-hmm. It's finding partners that have the same mission, and they want to present the programs as well. So I do think that the funding is crucial, but there are ways to do it. Then you have to find creative solutions for that.
Absolutely, and I think just going back again into the history of chamber music, there was the need, and that created necessity is the mother of invention, of course, but that also meant there were certain events that had to be celebrated, and we have wonderful pieces as a result of that, and also, wealthy people that played an instrument, and they wanted pieces written for that instrument, so they got to have a lot of pieces written for them. The social need, and I wish it didn't always come from a despondent place, and even today there are horrific actions happening around the world, in our own country of course, but also in other countries that are ongoing. And because of the information onslaught that we have now, we're much more aware of what's going on. And the small ensemble platform has always been a platform to a venue, sortie, a place for people to have a voice and to tell this story. And I think there is so much importance on and this is what I want to talk a little bit further into the profit versus nonprofit organizations, which includes ensembles and presenting organizations, that does dictate often how programming is done, which commissions are happening. In the past, commissions were an integral part of bringing small ensemble literature, and now we have this pressure sometimes. So even though you're able to get your music out through YouTube and have 12,000 hits, in the first day because of your following, that's great, but is that sharing the larger message of what your art really is and what you want to say, and or what chamber music is doing now, and the evolution and the importance that it has? I think the portability of chamber music has always made it, and I'll say chamber music, but it's really small ensemble that I want to focus on, that has always made a small ensemble music appealing because it's cheaper. And you can set it up on a stage like this, and you don't necessarily need a 68-piece orchestra plus. And you don't need a star conductor to take the headlines. Each and every person can be that headliner. So, Anna, in your experience, there is perhaps your colleagues in the presenting organizations and other venues program in a different way. And what has been your observation thus far of how it changes and affects how you want to program at National Sawdust versus what you see other venues doing?
As an artist manager, I had to communicate and book artists for all kinds of series. And, you know, usually was whoever got the latest album, whoever had the most recent release, or always an ensemble that was a famous ensemble. Like, there was really not a lot of opportunity for that middle of the road. Like, we have that sort of, everybody's excited about students because they're virtuosos and they're exciting, and sometimes they go in different directions and that ensemble dissolves, but there's that middle of the road that didn't cross that line to sort of superstardom. And then that it's sort of that middle group that I think it's very important, and most of traditional series don't have the space and time for them, unfortunately. So
and there's that word traditional.
Yes. So I think that we live in a world now where I think in general, everybody's sort of changing their mentality. Like, what's the story we're telling? What is the narrative? What is the message that our specific program has that is not just, oh, this famous quartet from Vienna is coming and we want to just see them perform whatever they perform. Like, the curation of the music and the themes and the compositions, it's the new music in this story they're telling, it's what's going to drive the audience in there and the new audiences. Because we're talking old audiences and new audiences as well.
Absolutely, and that curating of the new audience has been a source of excitement, anxiety for a lot of musicians, and this goes back into the education, that we have to make sure that the curriculum at the conservatory, school of music level, and even the pre-college level gives importance to these small ensembles, because you learn so much about chemistry, you learn so much about diplomacy, creative problem solving, listening, and working together, and that collaborative effort will always help them in their future. Leslie, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where we are now in small ensembles and in regards to perhaps what was happening 30 years ago versus now, and specifically about using technology.
I've had a plethora of experiences because I'm a freelancer. Of course, we have the straight up go play a gig chamber music stuff, but I've had some really unique experiences in the last few years in terms of incorporating technology. So one thing that we did do, a group that I'm in called Unoya Society, we did a remote live streaming concert where we used a software called Jack Trip and actually played together from different parts of the country. It was hard, but it was interesting what we were able to create. The other thing with that same group, we did a show last year in Chicago in a surround sound small theater. So it's sort of like shaped sort of circular, and everyone sits around the performers. We were in the middle, and every part of the theater has a different sound experience. And every speaker has 4 outlets. So that's a very different sonic experience. Fast forward to now, my current position as one of the members of a Hamilton string quartet for the Philip Tour. We do our entire show through in-ears with a microphone on our instrument. So you're hearing yourself amplified and everyone else. And because we were talking about this, I had a thought when we were in the pit the other night. Something happened with one of the musicians, and I think their mic went out or something, and it's interesting how suddenly you can feel the weight of the ensemble has changed, right? So like in an orchestral setting, there's so many people playing at one time. If one person stops to, pick up a water and take a sip, you don't notice it. But in that context, the fact that we're mic'd and we're going through in-ears, any small change to the core of the sound will jolt you. Instantly, I could feel something change in the texture. It's really also very hard because you're hearing yourself through a microphone all the time. So anything that sounds bad is like 10 times louder. So I've been able to experience technology in a different way in the last few years, and it's interesting. I still love the traditional acoustic sound of people with instruments sitting in a space in a beautiful acoustic room and just playing off the room. But I'm not mad at technology either, because it creates a lot of great possibilities. So I think
Absolutely.
Q&A.
Yeah, we're going to start getting some questions. I will get them online if I can get this thing working. Technology has really been nice to me today. Yeah, speaking of. What I also wanted to talk, so if anybody wants to come up to the mic, feel free, because I might need some help with this. Brittany. The other aspect of the education aspect, I just want to circle back to that too, because right now the schools of music have technology capabilities that they did not have previously, and there have been a lot of experimenting. And I wanted to ask, and all three of you, anybody can answer this, what do you feel have been the pieces of music that have been mixed media or not, that have been very impactful in your own experience and in your musical journey?
I'm just gonna jump in here because that's what National Sawdust is doing quite a bit. Like I said, we have Viennese Ensemble, who is a pure ensemble, and it is our standard ensemble for all new compositions. So, and a lot of our work is, some of our work is mapped into the space. Like you said, we have a constellation system with 110 speakers and 32 channels, and composers are creating music for the space with a pure ensemble. So our Hildegard commission is all a small ensemble. Our blueprint is all small ensemble. So
has there been a buzz about one of the pieces or one of the events more than others?
Hildegard for sure. Hildegard commission is one of our cornerstones, commission mentorship program, and yeah, it's we hope that every piece that gets commissioned and gets played in Hildegard, which by the way, March 9th in New York, we would love that to go other places. It's part of our goal that it starts there, is seated in National Sawdust, and it disseminates to other venues. So
that's wonderful. Anybody else had a piece they wanted to talk about? Go ahead.
I just wanted to touch on collaboration, commissioning, and technology. Even if I or the group I'm playing in at whatever given moment, even if we're not using a special effect, the passing of information, aka email, just sending a score. Hey, can you look through it? Mm-hmm. Here are updates to a piece. Can you play it now? Mm-hmm. It makes things possible to move quickly, and I think the speed at which a score can change is sometimes like just being able to play it. We're human, but I think it's in the end it's a good thing that we have such rapid communication and abilities to communicate.
Absolutely, and this did change also how chamber music came to be, because when paper print was facilitated and available more to the masses, it really did change how music was shared, and people were able to play music that was not as elite, and it actually changed how composers wrote as well, because they had to then write a little bit more for the masses and people who weren't as talented as Paganini and Joseph. Yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Suli Nirio, and I'm the founder of the Afro-Latinx Song and Opera Project. I uplift the historical contributions of Afro-Latin folks that are erased from the canon, but also do commissioning. And I'm also an opera singer, soprano. God, what a surprise. But my question and kind of comment is, through the past couple of years, I've been able to do a lot more ensemble work and a lot more chamber work. I especially collaborate in Pittsburgh with the wind chamber ensemble. They commission things that they include me in. And I love the freedom that I've been able to experience in that work and through some of the commissions through my project. And I guess my question, my comment is for what are some things that you would say to opera singers, vocalists, to engage more in the ensemble and chamber work world and kind of find the freedom that I was so lucky to find in that
Don't
space?
be scared. Don't be scared. It's true. I think there's a disconnect sometimes just because we don't get to hang out with singers as much. There's the first reason, but when you do have an opportunity, and that comes down sometimes if you're going to go to a festival and you know another ensemble is going to be at that festival, you can start researching pieces that you can collaborate on. Some people are more active in that than others, but everybody should be active in this, which involves research, which involves listening, and involves looking at pieces that have been reprogrammed because perhaps they work on many levels. They're just the right length, they're the right instrumentation, that's not, some gamelan water bucket from in deep, Amazon or something. So like it has to be practical in some ways. But I think just talking to people around and talking to people in your community and saying, I heard this piece, it's really great. What if we do it? Let's just find it. And so you creating that opportunity rather than waiting. And this is
Also write your own music.
And then you can write your own music. I'm the backseat arranger, so I'm not.
Or arrange your own music. You know what I mean?
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
You can write and arrange your own music. I think the mistake is waiting
Yep.
for something to come to you. I think we all do that as artists, and I had to get out of that mindset as well.
Absolutely.
Especially with students and where they are and ability and opportunity. There's not always something there. Sometimes you just have to create it yourself.
Yes, and workshop it. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned with my early days with Imani Winds and with my other ensembles is that when you're working with a composer, and it might be a composer who's just starting to write for a smaller ensemble, hopefully it will be a collaborative effort. And I think both parties should know that there are elements that give a piece longevity and that they don't diminish the quality or the message or the personal expression, but that they can enhance what it is you're both trying to do together so that the piece can have legs and it can have staying power. I think we're seeing that with some of the early composers of color who were not always encouraged, and therefore probably half of their scores got lost, burnt, disintegrated away somewhere because nobody thought about it, believed in them, and they didn't have that opportunity. So we're responsible now to keep that collaborative effort, which means composers also have to be flexible. Yes,
I'd
sir.
also like to add, I don't think you necessarily have to know exactly who and what you are straight out of the gate. I think if you just choose something that you're interested in, and that impulse will lead you to something else. And you can't always predict what that'll be, but if you follow that impulse, it'll take you somewhere.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for talking about chamber music. I'm a French horn player, and chamber music is what I'm drawn most to. I play in a wind quintet, so I've loved listening and performing the Imani Winds works, Valerie Coleman especially. I'm wondering, I'm thinking about how in classical music, chamber is kind of like, it's the not orchestra part. But in most genres, there's nothing other than chamber music because, there's no 100-piece, rock band. So I'm wondering how, we can kind of, if there's things we can learn from those genres that have such, worldwide relevance and huge audiences and real engagement. I'm wondering, what we have to change in our approach to.
That's a big question. I'm going to just jump in with the pounding of the pavement that Imani Winds had to do in the beginning, because it was seen almost as the stepchild of chamber music. Because you say chamber music, it's going to be piano trio, string quartet. That's it. Maybe string quartet plus a guest. And for us to convince audiences that we were not this, what we used to call the type of wind quintet. We had to create a sound that was bigger. And ultimately, we just played bigger, loud, and also expansive pieces. And also our composers were writing for Mariam, Jeff, Toyin, Monica, Valerie. They were writing for the individuals. And that meant our personalities, which kind of explains all those crazy writings of the parts and things. So I think that now it is concert by concert. It's person by person. We didn't have, I loved being able to meet audience members after the concerts, and I still do, to be able to talk about what they liked and encourage them to go to another concert of an ensemble that maybe they wouldn't have gravitated to. And it's that discovery little by little. There is a little bit of a risk now, and maybe you ladies will agree, that because we have access to so much, things get diluted a little bit. As even if you go on YouTube and you go on down a rabbit hole of looking up wind quintets, it's not always the answer to what you need just because you're going to expose yourself to more of this. It's bringing works that are relevant to your community, that to a certain series. If you're still in school, you can use that platform very strongly, and it's free. And this is something that I feel we have to, while playing traditional repertoire that people like, and it has staying power for a reason often because it's just well written for the instruments, that pushing of the comfort zone for audiences is something that we have to hold their hand sometimes. So when you're introducing a piece of music that somebody may not know, give them active listening points, give them context, give them anecdotes, give them something to attach to because they're about to go into the unknown territory. And every time you do that, just think of every concert you've gone to when someone said, this piece was inspired by the rolling brook, but then there was this really loud frog, and then they wrote this, and like you just immediately have these images that then attach your ears to something, and then you become more endeared to it, and you're more likely to share that experience with somebody else. And it really is that ripple effect that I found is effective, but then it's also persistence.
I love that question because me being a musician who dabbles, like Mariam said, in other genres, what I like about that question is something that we don't talk about a lot when we're training musicians. In the classical world, which I don't even love to say classical world because I think that's just really vague and very inaccurate in a lot of ways, there's this very clear separation between performer and audience. Even the way that we practice, we go into a room, we close the door, sometimes we even cover the glass so no one can look at us, and we isolate ourselves, and we keep our art to ourselves. And there's this kind of like perception, well, if you smile too hard or you move too much, it's cheesy, it's corny, you're selling out, it's commercial, right? And then we ask ourselves, how come people don't want to attend our concerts? It's because we're boring them. That's why. I mean, as a musician myself, a lot of times when I go to classical concerts, I'm bored. Because the people performing don't look like they enjoy it. The programming is stale and old, and it's the same stuff all over and over and over again. We don't know what the groove is. What's the groove, right? Because like when you go to a Stevie Wonder concert or you go to Dua Lipa or whoever, like you know where the groove is. It's not abstract. You don't have to guess where one is. But when we perform in classical music, we try and make it so elite that we exclude the people we're actually performing for. And so we take the humanity out of the art form. And we criticize people in other genres for being sellouts. But they know how to engage their audience, and that's why people keep coming, right? So someone asked me, there's this trumpeter from Detroit, his name is Marcus Belgrave, and he said something one time, everybody gotta have a little gimmick. And he's an amazing trumpeter. He sounds like Clifford Brown reincarnated and better. He's passed on, but he's amazing. But people come to hear you because they want to be involved. They don't want to be excluded. And I think the way that we've been educated, especially those of us who went to, the better schools, we've been taught not to bring ourselves down to a particular level. Then also there's never any spontaneity in the way that we create. We rehearse everything to the end of the second beat and measure 35. We're gonna, it's like, it's always so rehearsed that there's no spontaneity. And then improvisation, we don't improvise very much at all in this genre. That wasn't always the case. But so we've made it so institutionalized and so elitist that it just doesn't involve the people who are listening most of the time. That's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I was saying that we even rehearse the way we walk in and out and off the stage. But that's also because that's because of previous, situations when somebody needed to be practice getting on and off stage. I'm going to read a couple questions from the chat, which actually touch on this because this audience participation and engagement is everything. So we have, how can we bring the intimacy of a chamber performance into larger music performance settings? And we just touched on this a little bit, but the intimacy, it's a great word. It's a great word because it touches on this of bringing you into the living room, which is, again, the origins of the chamber music. You like how I just wrapped it around there? You just come back into the parlor. And that intimacy, you got to see the musician sweating over the music. Maybe you could look over their shoulder and look at the music they're playing. But breaking down that barrier, I always said with Imani Wins, we put the fun back in dysfunctional. We had a lot of fun on stage. We were cackling just seconds before we came on. It was this need to keep that intimacy and that camaraderie so that the music could breathe beyond our just rigorous rehearsal schedule. And with any ensemble, you want to have that. And there's some people that are comfortable with that, and there's some people that are not. And that goes into the aspect of creating an ensemble with people with whom you jive, and people that get you, and that you can have chemistry, and you can have repartee, and you can trust that when you get on stage and get off the page a little bit, you will hold that, you guys know where you are, and depending on the repertoire, you will find liberty in that, and the audience will experience that too. Everybody hopefully has had a magical moment where they've experienced and witnessed the musicians having something. I feel like sometimes jazz musicians allow themselves more of that because it is in the idiom, but it's starting to mix now into other ensembles, and that welcoming factor, and that's just talking to the audience and explaining what you're doing a little bit without, shucking and jiving, but it's still a necessary dialogue. Well, I'll read, we have 2 more questions here we can get to, and please, if you have anything or comment, it doesn't have to be a question. This is a family situation here. I mean, I really feel that the SphinxConnect is one large family, and it's so nice to see some new faces and older familiar faces. How do your organizations and ensembles tackle making contemporary music more approachable for audiences that may have limited experience, interest in classical music, let alone new music?
I think being intentional about why you program what and how to find a through line. And before this panel, I did just a survey of a bunch of different chamber music societies around the country of their programs, and I found 3 programming styles. There's what I call level 1, the straight up. It's your Haydn, Beethoven, Brahms. Little effort, I would say. Level 2, maybe Mozart, a new piece, and a Brahms. That's your sandwich. So we're familiar with this. And then level 3 is what I call bold, when people are inventive, innovative, and clearly excited about what they're bringing to the table. And what I would love is larger organizations with larger budgets, larger networks to funding, if they could lead the way in that and make it easier for those with smaller budgets to maybe use some of these pieces. But what I do see is the opposite. I see younger chamber ensembles being bold in their programming. And I do think that's the future.
And it is a financial risk, but it shouldn't be. And the ensembles that are able to hear the word no and to play for not a profit for a while, because hopefully they are being funded by grants or even private funding, we have a responsibility to recognize those efforts. Many pieces that are our standard pieces today are the result of a plethora of other pieces that are not the standard, that got performed, but that didn't have any staying power. But to get through that process, to get through those pieces, it's a lot. And so even if you don't like a piece, you do have to applaud the effort. Even if you don't like a certain programming, we do have to applaud the effort, because every time we don't, we're sending the message that we can have that, what'd you call it, tier A, level A, easy, that's okay. And the part of the exploration that we have now is a liberty, and it's a freedom, and it's a gift to be able to share new ideas. So I really hope that we get this message to the greater audiences. Yes?
I also have a thought about that, and I feel like frequently we jump from like Mozart to like somebody who composed in 2022, and there's not a lot in between. So it doesn't make sense to the audience sometimes. You know, it's like if you're familiar with visual art and you've only been looking at Picasso, and then suddenly someone puts a canvas in front of you that has like blood stains on it and like, you know, it's like your aesthetic just jumped so severely, it doesn't look like art to you because you're not used to that. And I think sometimes in programming with music, that's what happens. We have people listening to Mozart, and then we give them Chineke. It's like,
yes, absolutely. And
you know,
I will just leave it on the woodwind side of things, is that we have an inherent window of time of our repertoire, because the instruments were just not advanced up until really like the 1900s, late 1880s. So a lot of the repertoire, the better repertoire that's more interesting, that gives equal footing to all the instruments, is in the last 100+ years, and that's changing. But yes, there's often this huge gap, and there's a reason. Maybe we're not feeling it, because maybe just the music is not relevant. So the last question that I have here, unless I hear from somebody, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, I did. Go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm a Title I school teacher. I teach at a Mackinac program in Fort Lauderdale. We believe in chamber music. We do that on a whole-time basis, and we love to add crazy composers, even friends of friends who just have pieces that we can share. I think, and I just wanted to add, we should make our schools also be open-minded about how they do their chamber music competitions, orchestra competitions, and things like that, because a lot of the times they also kind of dumb us down to have to only play Beethoven, only play Brahms. And if we have like a new composer that's out there, maybe he hasn't published his stuff yet, it's probably Creative Commons at this point, they don't really like it when we go out there and start going with this like crazy composers that nobody has heard before. Tomas Baixo, for example, is an amazing composer who wrote this beautiful piece about Pablo Casals, and it has like the prelude, you know, in G minor instead of major, right? Coming in with these crazy sounds in the background. I think it's really cool to add that to our schools, and maybe even through the competitions, regionals, and so on, we can kind of open up that plethora, you know, for new composers and like new arrangements and stuff like that. So just wanted to add that.
That's a wonderful point, and I will extend that to all of us, you know, professional musicians that might be putting together an audition list for a festival or for the school, to include repertoire of new and up-and-coming composers. Include that repertoire. Don't put the standard. Even, you know, Mozart Clarinet Concerto is ready to go on the shelf. It's okay. It's okay. We'll get to that when we need to, but it's a responsibility on the educator side. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Also with jury requirements, I just want to throw that in there.
And jury requirements, absolutely. Yes, the curriculum side is everything. Do we have time for one more question?
We're out of time, actually. We went really over. I'm so sorry, but...
Oh, you told me I had 20 minutes. Listen, you guys have been wonderful. I want to thank Celia, Leslie, Anna for joining us today. Thank you to Afa and Aaron and everybody here at Sphinx Conference.